Welcome to my talk about the best way to learn. My name is Sandra, I'm a physician and an anesthesia trainee, and when not doing that, I'm deeply passionate about education and how we learn. So, the best way to learn. What is the best way to learn? If I ask you that question, what would your answer be? Some of you might answer, that's easy. I would read the material, I would highlight, make notes and outlines, and then I would reread the material one more time and of course finish it off with a test to make sure that learning was achieved. Some of you might answer differently and go another way and say that it depends, because we all have different learning styles, which would mean that you believe in the idea that we learn best in one specific way, for example, through reading, writing, listening, or being active during the learning process. If your answer falls into any of these two categories, you are not alone. In 2019, this survey was published, and it was about the awareness and usage of evidence-based learning strategies among people just like you and me. And what they found was that 48% of the students reported using rereading as a learning strategy, and many of us can probably agree that we have also more than once reread material believing that just the act of re-exposing ourselves to the words one more time would strengthen learning. It is not the case, and rereading material is not an evidence-based learning strategy. Highlighting was also reported as a learning strategy from 58% of the students. And again, I can show you more than one book from my time in medical school covered in all the colors of the rainbow, believing that those colors would somehow help me burn the words into my brain. They did not, unfortunately. For faculty, the numbers were a bit lower, with 31% reporting that they recommended non-evidence-based strategies to their students in the form of rereading and highlighting. You may be relieved that the numbers are lower for faculty, but for me it shows a lack of focus on teaching our faculty about teaching and learning, so that they can make sure that our future colleagues learn what they need to learn and do so most effectively. When it comes to learning styles, the numbers are a bit more alarming, with 91% of faculty reporting that they do believe the students have one dominant learning style, and 79% actually trying to teach to accommodate those differences. The students were a bit more skeptic when it comes to learning styles, but still more than half reported that they believed that they had a specific learning style. Just to be clear, there is no evidence that supports the use of a dominant learning style over another, and that you as a person will learn more from sticking to just one strategy. That myth has been busted. One style does not fit all, but please do incorporate more than one teaching and learning strategy into your curriculum, so to stimulate learners in more than one way. Then what? What is the best way to learn? And why are we even talking about learning at a resuscitation conference? Most of us are already experienced learners and teachers, and we and our patients have survived despite the extensive highlighting and rereading. Well, I have 3 reasons for you. 1, you and me both are on a journey of lifelong learning here. You still have to learn, relearn, and unlearn material, and our brain is not what it used to be. Also, our time for learning is limited, so it really has to be effective. 2, because at conferences we are presented, and note how I didn't say we learn here, but we are presented with huge amount of new and important knowledge, not worth much if we don't have an evidence-based strategy for remembering that knowledge and bringing it home with us and decide how to implement it into our daily practice. And lastly, 3, what this survey showed, that out there in our faculties, back at our own institutions, way too little weight is put on the importance of us knowing how we learn best and how we can incorporate evidence-based learning strategies into what we do to the benefit of our patients. And if we don't think about the best way to learn, it might just all get lost between the conference room and the airport, or between this online streaming session and the next show on Netflix. So, for the next just about 10 minutes, we will talk about what ways are the best to learn. The best way to learn is to know how your brain works and how memory works. And the best way to get your brain and memory going is to make sure it gets its attention. Think of your favorite childhood memory and your biggest fear. You have absolutely no problem with recalling all details about those situations because the attention you gave to those memories when they were formed at first impact was so strong that they got stuck in your brain. And the frequent daydreaming or nightmares made the memories even stronger. Therefore, once your brain is awake and you have its attention, make sure you make learning sticky. Because the best way to learn is to make learning sticky. The end. If you know what that means, you can lean back and just enjoy the repetition. If you don't know what that means, now is the time to pay attention. Somehow, the idea of attention and stickiness hasn't fully translated into how we think about learning. Here we seem to think that easier is better. We practice that it's best to learn one thing before moving on to the next. We seem to believe that training one element of a complex procedure is the best way to learn the whole thing instead of training the complex procedure in context and allowing time for learning so it lasts. And easier isn't better. When we make our practice more difficult by wearing it up, by mixing and interleaving our practice, we get better. The varying and interleaving teaches us how to discriminate and differentiate, all very useful skills for a resuscitationist. And how can we translate that into what we are doing in our community with learning? Well, maybe we think about how we design sessions at conferences like this. Not all airway in one session, not all education in one session, not all BLS in one and ALS in another. We have to learn to embrace difficulties because it works. It forms stronger and deeper learning, and it teaches us learning that is more adaptive. You would find it a bit annoying and struggle with the concept, but remember what I just said. Easier isn't better. Difficulties are good for learning. Interleaving, varying, and mixing practice up makes learning stronger. Another way we have a tendency to make learning easier is by spoon-feeding people with knowledge. What do I mean by that? Well, we spoon-feed people when we give lecture after lecture, like I do with you now, where learners can just lean back and passively try to absorb what's being said. But as we all know, it doesn't take long before the mind wanders and we think about something else. Mission not accomplished. We spoon feed people when we give them constant coaching and feedback without allowing a little bit of time to struggle and think and be blank. And we spoon feed knowledge when we give all the answers up front instead of asking the right questions. So, when I say easier isn't better, I'm not advocating for an eternal struggle and constant stress during learning. That is also not productive. It has to be a balance. If too easy, we don't care and get bored. If too hard, we disengage and get stressed out. Another benefit of varying and mixing up learning is creating time for forgetting. And when it comes to learning, forgetting is a good thing. When we forget, we have to retrieve knowledge, and the retrieval practice strengthens learning. Of course, it's not beneficial to learn something and then completely forget all about it, because then you have to start from scratch. Again, not effective. But what we have to do and know is that spacing out learning is an extremely effective strategy for learning. And what the survey mentioned earlier showed us that despite the strong evidence for spaced repetition, nor students or faculty make very much use of it. For example, 68% of students reported that they don't review course material after a course has ended, ending up forgetting most of it if not introduced in following courses, and not aided by their faculty, where 24% report that they do not return to earlier material, and 46% stating that they would not make use of spaced repetition in class. And what a shame. Because when we look at surgeons performing microsurgery on the aorta of rats, the surgeons were divided into two groups, one receiving learning as a massed practice with 4 sessions of theory and practice in one day, and then a test on exactly 1 month later. The other group had 4 sessions, also theory and practice, but they were spaced out 1 week apart, also tested 1 month after the 4th session. The spacing group outperformed the mass practice group, and by quite a great deal. In fact, 16% of the surgeons made so severe damage to the rats that they weren't able to complete the procedure and the rat died. The message being, spaced repetition works. It's quite foolish to spend a lot of energy on delivering learning to people and not repeating it in spaced out sessions, because they will forget. And that is not what we want. Not for the surgeons, rats, or for the resuscitationists. Not for the surgeons, rats, or the resuscitationists. And we all know that we lose our resuscitation skills within a few months when not repeated or used. The last best way to learn for today is reflection. To learn, reflect. And what does that mean? Well, reflection or metacognition is the art of thinking about thinking. It's an active process where we monitor our own learning. And by thinking about what we think, what we did, how we did it, and why we did it, and what we're going to take from it, we can strengthen learning. Reflection opens up the mind and allows for new connections and ideas to unfold. It also gives us time to remember and think about what we have forgotten and try to retrieve it. And the actual art of reflection is really, really good at making strong brain connections between the subjects that we are interleaving and spacing and mixing out, and make sure that we can get a sort of holistic knowledge around things. Reflection can be done in groups, like we know from the different types of learning conversations that we participate in at different courses, or maybe just in reflection groups if we have that at our workplace. It can also be done alone in the form of reflective writing. And reflective writing is also one of the best ways to learn. In a study where psychology students participated, and they were taught the art of reflective writing. It was incorporated into their teaching, and they scored way better in topics they had written about than in the topics they had only been re-exposed to in the form of statements. So, to learn, reflect. So, learn to reflect. So, to summarize, the best way to learn is to make learning sticky. You do that by activating your brain, by embracing difficulties because easier isn't better, by allowing time for forgetting so retrieval and spaced repetition is needed, and by remembering that learning is a mind game where thinking about learning will make you way better than being spoon-fed with answers, even when it's about a practical skill. So, what do I want you to do now? Well, before heading on to the next session, reflect. Have a think about what to remember and learn from what I just said. Out with a notebook and start writing down what you want to take home from this session and spend a good 10 minutes on that. Even when you've forgotten what I or Simon or Ross just said, guess it's more effective than rewatching the whole thing right away. Do that in a day or two instead, and then again in a few weeks and maybe in a couple of months, just to mix it up and space it out, because that is the best way to learn.